And my interest in German led to me having a von Humboldt Fellowship in Germany. And I learned the language so that I could talk freely with the people, particularly in Eastern Europe and particularly in the German Democratic Republic, as it was then called. Because I was interested to see what effect an atheist philosophy had on the intellectual life of a country, on its education. Now, I look round and I see most of you weren't born when the Berlin Wall fell. Could you imagine me coming into a home as I did, and a girl comes crying home from school. She's 13. And of course, being a visitor, I was very concerned. Why are you crying, Esther? She said, I can't study anymore. She was the brightest girl in the school. Grade A's all the way through. Absolutely brilliant. Why can't you study anymore? Well, the teacher tells me that we're having a parade in a couple of weeks' time, and you have to stand beneath the colossal head of Karl Marx in Karl-Marx-Stadt, Chemnitz as it's called today, and swear a public oath of allegiance to the atheistic state. 13 years old. I won't do it, sir. Then you'll have to work in the slipper factory. I stood and wept with her, because I call that intellectual murder, ladies and gentlemen. And on my pathway, those images from the past have made a very deep impression, so that I get alarmed as I see sometimes in our Western free world, as it's called, the stealthy but sure indications of another totalitarianism of mind that doesn't really allow people to think. They mark you, and that's why I'm explaining to you where I am coming from. Of course, the wall fell, and I helped to knock it down, actually. Very gently, but I did. And then I started going to Russia. For many years, I'd been a translator of mathematical Russian. Unfortunately, I never heard the language. So my knowledge of it was passive until suddenly I'm taken to Siberia on a two-way ticket. But I'm taken to Siberia, and I was forced to learn it very rapidly. And that was fascinating. I want you to imagine this happening in your campus in the Mathematical Institute. Professor Lennox gives a lecture on subnormal subgroups of groups. And the learned professors there ask some polite questions, which I try to answer and usually can't. And then they say, excuse me, can we ask other questions? Certainly, be delighted. We hear you believe in God. Why? Does that happen every week in your maths department? And hour after hour, every time I gave a maths lecture, those were the questions they wanted answered. So I very rapidly found myself in amongst the dissidents. Fascinating. I met one man, he told me he'd been 7 years in the Gulag, and he seemed quite cheery about it. And I said, you know, how could you be cheery about it? Oh, he said, you got to understand that the Gulag was the best university there's ever been. All the most brilliant people in Russia were there. But he said, don't go there now, it's full of criminals. And I was amazed at this. His tiny collection of books, which he called his treasures. We talked night after night after night after night for 2 months. And what did they all want to talk about? God. Why? Was one of my questions. Why do you suddenly get interested in belief in God? Well, one reason they explained to me was this. Was the devaluation of human beings they'd experienced. The failed attempt to construct a new man. And I can remember one distinguished professor of mathematics saying to me, John, he said, it's very simple. We thought we thought that we could get rid of God and retain a value for human beings. And we discovered we couldn't. Dostoevsky, you know, was right, he said. If God does not exist, everything is permissible. And Dostoevsky, of course, in the Brothers Karamazov, did not mean that no atheist could be ethical. My atheist friends frequently put me to shame in their care for other people. He was talking at a deeper level. He was saying there's no rational justification for behavior if there isn't a God. And he said we experienced it massively. That's what he said, not me. And I heard it again and again and again. Hence their interest. How was it possible for me as a mathematician, of all people, to believe in God? Because to them they had an axiom. It really was an axiom because it was an unquestioned postulate that there was no God. I remember many a conversation went like this. You believe in God? That's right, I said I do. Well, I don't. Why don't you? Well, there isn't a God. I said, okay. Why do you believe there isn't a God? What do you mean by the question why? Well, I mean, what is the evidence that there isn't a God? Evidence? Not a matter of evidence. There just isn't a God. Well, I said, that's twice you made the same assertion. But what about evidence? And then it was very interesting to watch the light dawn. And they said, you don't, goodness me, do you mean to tell me that your belief in God is based on evidence? I was amazed at this the first time I met it. I said, well, of course. I'd be an absolute idiot to believe in God if there wasn't evidence. That confusion, ladies and gentlemen, is at the heart of much of the modern debate.